Minister for Education.
Thank you, sir. I'll speak tonight on the bill to share a brief outline of my views on this matter, and particularly for the interest of any constituents of mine who are interested. A number, I'd say probably in the order of 500 or 600, have expressed a view on both sides of the issue, and I've written back to them. And so I'll paraphrase some of that information and add one or two other brief comments. In brief, sir, I am keenly interested in the views of my constituents, particularly in matters related to votes of conscience, if you like, and seek to read all the correspondence they get. I listen to the arguments, I obviously bring my own views and experience to the table, and I apply my judgment to the legislation at hand. But every single piece of correspondence from a constituent, whether it is a relaying of ideas that they've had suggested by others, whether it's drawing on their own personal experiences or expertise, is a piece of correspondence that conveys to the local MP their views and has value and merit, and I take the time to read them and consider it. Particularly, sometimes there are new things that you have not necessarily considered. And that, of course, is also true sometimes in the debate. I think there's been some useful contributions through the course of this debate, and I look forward, particularly should the bill pass the second reading, to hearing more in relation to specific proposed amendments, which will obviously change the tenor of the application of the proposed legislation to certain aspects of the bill, which I'll go into in a moment. It's important, as some have already identified, to identify in relation to any vote on any bill, the decision in question is between supporting the new proposal or supporting the existing law continuing without any changes. Sometimes it's important to remind ourselves in that context of what is already in the existing law so it can accurately be compared with the new proposed law. I identify that a number of the pieces of correspondence I've received suggest a reflection on a preferred alternative course of action rather than comparing the proposed law with what is already in legislation. So tonight, as some have said, the principle at stake is not whether abortions will become available, which was considered in 1969 in the Parliament. For more than 50 years, terminations have been widely available during the first 28 weeks of pregnancy, according to the current statute. Provision also exists in the current law for terminations to take place after 28 weeks in circumstances where a medical practitioner is of the opinion, formed in good faith, that the termination is immediately necessary to save the life or to prevent grave injury to the physical or mental health of the pregnant woman. The bill is being considered by the Parliament this evening, and potentially over the course of this week proposes several key changes which we are being asked to consider. Firstly, the framework for the legislation to be moved from the Criminal Law Consolidation Act into a standalone piece of legislation, the Termination of Pregnancy Act. Secondly, the time frame for the standard consideration of a termination to be allowed to be reduced from 28 weeks to 22 weeks and 6 days. Next, terminations taking place within 22 weeks and 6 days to require one doctor rather than two to be treating the patient. The framework within which a termination could take place after 22 weeks and 6 days would require, according to the proposal, two medical practitioners to be of the view that the proposed procedure is medically appropriate, and I'll come back to this matter, which has obviously attracted the majority of consideration by those expressing opinions through the course of the debate. Also, the bill proposes a right for a medical practitioner to conscientiously object to participating in the procedure being enshrined in the legislation, and also a new major indictable offence to be created for unqualified persons performing or assisting in the performance of the termination. Obviously, the proponents of the bill have argued that the legislation essentially updates the existing rules in line with modern medical technology, providing a consistent framework within which members of the community can be clear about what their rules are and how the termination might take place within what rules, and of course not necessarily just within a public hospital. I have sought further information about the sorts of circumstances within which a termination after the prescribed period might be authorised, and there have been much discussion about that during the course of the debate. Of course, The circumstances in question are usually described as where the mother's life is in jeopardy, similar to those envisaged in the current Section 82 of the Criminal Law Consolidation Act. But of course, we also have a number of amendments now tabled that would limit the application of this bill to those circumstances or similar ones, and we'll consider those tomorrow, I expect, assuming that the bill is allowed a second reading by this House, which is of course a matter for all 47 members to consider in the coming little period. I reflect that while much of the correspondence has suggested a vote for or against the bill, I would encourage anybody reading this contribution who's expressed such a view to reflect on that the bill as a whole, as it will be defined by the third reading, really depends on what happens in those amendments that will be potentially considered during the committee stage of the debate. I think that many of the things that are proposed in this bill are actually reasonably uncontroversial, or indeed some would be described by potentially all sides of the debate as positive steps forward. That's my assessment, is that by and large it does modernise the legislation in line with current medical practice and technology. Indeed, the reduction in gestation time before the stricter provisions for late terminations from 28 weeks to less than 23 weeks is a significant step that recognises the potential for a successful birth after that time as a result of advances in medical technology over the last 50 years. For that reason, along with others, I propose to support the bill at its second reading vote. Now, obviously, many people in the community have raised with me their concerns about the lack of definition in the legislation, about what circumstances the medical practitioners would need to consider before carrying out a procedure after 23 weeks. Alternatives to the mechanism described in the bill for the procedures, as I say, have been tabled to be discussed if the bill passes second reading, and there may yet be more amendments to come to hand overnight. And like all members, I'm sure, I will give serious consideration to those amendments during the committee stage of the debate. There has been an enormous amount of expertise in the legal and medical recommendations of people with great levels of community-mindedness and expertise in these areas that have been proffered to all members of Parliament, indeed in both sides of this question over what are the appropriate legal frameworks for what would happen after 23 weeks. And I want to offer my thanks to those members of the community and the professions and indeed from all over the community who have provided that counsel to me. I'll be obviously casting my vote for or against amendments as I see is in the appropriate best interests of the people of South Australia, and that record, together with these comments, will give some reflection on my views on this matter for those constituents who may be interested.